On today's Locked On Pacers, diving into the Pacers cap space situation this summer. How much do they actually have? Can they get any more? Why the salary floor is going to be confusing, why the draft matters so much, and once again, why this Pacers offseason is guaranteed to be extremely busy. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are diving into the Pacers salary cap situation. How much space do they actually have? What will matter for them on draft night with that space up to free agency? How can they create more space? How does the salary floor impact all this? And like I've said a million times, like their roster spot crunch dictates, why this is almost guaranteed to be a crazy offseason for this Pacers team. The salary cap new rules basically force it to be a nutso summer for the Pacers. We'll get to all of it today. This week coming, Asar Thompson, Amen Thompson breakdown shows with Ben Pfeiffer coming, and we're going to do another free agency preview, the last one actually, with Kendall Brown and Gabe York. And then next week, Cam Whitmore, extensions, all sorts of fun stuff coming and planned. Got to plan way ahead because I'm going to be out of town for the next 6 days. So got to get these episodes done as early as possible. But cap space, I wanted to get to this now. I've been talking about this a few times on this show, but there's a lot of chatter about how much space the Pacers would have this summer. That was preemptive. It's impossible to know before the lottery. In fact, it's still technically impossible to know. And full disclosure, if you're listening to this, it's actually my second time recording this first segment because the first one sounds like I'm screaming into a fan like a kid. It just sounds like a robot for 10 minutes. So hopefully this one comes up better. If you're hearing it, that means it did. So I'm going to try to say the same things I said the first time. But if there's some repeat stuff in the second and third segment, that's why. But the Pacers salary cap situation is just totally fascinating, right? The numbers you're going to hear for their cap space are going to be huge. And that's largely because the Pacers have no big contracts on their team at all. Miles Turner makes under $21 million, just barely this coming season after his renegotiation last year, right? He made the max last season. That number's down to $21 million now. He's the highest paid player on the team. Buddy Hield at 18, 19 million. He's the second highest, and then Daniel Tice is third. He's below 10 million at 9 point something. As the Pacers veered into this era they're currently in, where they really, really prioritized flexibility and optionality, their big buzzwords you heard for years and years, you get these really, really small numbers like this, and that's why their cap space situation is what it is, where they're going to have more space than a lot of other teams just by default because they don't have any big contracts on their team. It's completely ridiculous how clean their books are, right? After Tice, it's McConnell at 8.7 million, Matherin at 6.9, Haliburton at 5.8, Nesmith at 5.6, Jalen Smith at 5, Duarte at 4.1, Wara at 3, Isaiah Jackson at 2.7, and Nembhard at 2.1. That's it. That's the whole team. But they still have 12 players under contract. It's such a unique situation where you have a really cheap team by team salary, but still have a lot of valuable players under contract. And that's why this Pacers situation, as they kind of venture into this summer, is just absolutely fascinating to me from a salary cap perspective. So from a few assumptions you need to know as this show progresses and as this segment progresses is that I am projecting the NBA will see the maximum legal growth in the salary cap this offseason. They capped it during the COVID seasons. They said to recover, well, they're not going to let the salary cap grow more than 10% in a given season. And they just added that as an official rule in the new CBA too, as a part of smoothing because they know a new TV deal is coming. So the highest the salary cap can possibly be this coming season is a hair over 136 million, so little over that it doesn't even matter. So $136 million cap. The 12 players I just named you combine for a total Pacers team salary of $93 million, 93.5 to be more accurate, right? That's crazy low. That, in theory, if you just heard those two numbers, you'd say, huh? The Pacers have $43 million in cap space. That's wrong, but that is what that sounds like, right? Now, there's a couple other things that factor in here that are really important to know and that kind of set the tone for a lot of the decisions the Pacers will have to make in terms of how can they get more cap space? What's the actual amount of space that they're going to have? Can they actually sign somebody for $43 million? The first thing is they have 3 other guaranteed salaries on their books next season. They can't get rid of them to players that aren't on the team. Malik Fitz, Juwan Morgan, and Nick Stauskas. Remember them? Pacers got them in the Malcolm Brogdon to Boston trade, but cut all 3 of them and stretched their contracts to reduce their cap hit so they could make a run at DeAndre Ayton, who they ultimately did not get last summer. But that is why their salaries are on the books this year and will be again next year. That's about $1.8 million. So subtract that from that $43 million I just said. And then you get to the nitty-gritty stuff, the dorky, cappy stuff called cap holds. In the second segment, you'll hear a little bit more of an explanation on cap holds, but it's basically a free agent hold that allows a team to keep their own players. And George Hill has one. His is kind of big. Not kind of big. His is big compared to what you'd expect for his salary because of what his salary was this past season. O'Shea Brissett has a cap hold. James Johnson, all the free agents, the two-way guys have a cap hold for the Pacers, right? That eats into your salary cap space. And you can just get rid of them. We'll talk about that in the second segment. But sometimes you just keep on the books. Why would you get rid of them if you don't have to? They can be valuable in sign-in trades in theory. They can be valuable 2 and 3 seasons from now in theory. The Pacers still have Lance Stephenson's cap hold on the books. They just got rid of Tyreek Evans' cap hold this season to do the renegotiation and extension of Miles Turner. He was suspended for 2 seasons. It has been out of the league since 2019. They just got rid of his cap hold, right? They can have value, even if it's a 0.005% chance. Why would you get rid of it? There's no point to do that when it could have value. So those chew into the Pacers cap space. Of all the Pacers free agents combined, that's Hill, Brissett, Johnson, Brown, and York, as well as Stevenson, that's $14 million in cap holds. So if you add those in, you get the Pacers down to about $28 million in cap space. But wait, there's more. It's not a fair way to do this because the Pacers also have draft picks on their team. They can't just assume they're not going to pick anybody. They're not going to make all 5 of their picks. They've said that very publicly. This isn't some source reporting thing. Kevin Pritchard has said it at least 3 times publicly on the record. We're not going to make all 5 picks. We can't. Our situation does not allow for it. The way we want to go next year in terms of the postseason does not allow for it. We can't. But first-round picks still have a rookie scale amount that they're subject to. And the Pacers have to project for their team, assuming that they're going to have all 3 picks on the team. If not, whatever their trades are going to be. But the 7th pick, their best pick, has a cap hold or a salary next season of $6.5 million. It's a little less than that. It's closer to 5.43 is their rookie scale amount, but all of them get 120% of them, right? $6.5 million, that puts him 6th on the team in cap hit / salary next year, behind Mathurin, McConnell, Tice, Hield, and Turner, ahead of Halliburton, ahead of Nesmith. You can go on and on. There's also the 26th pick, which comes in at $2.5 million, and the 29th pick, which comes in at $2.4 million. You add those 3 guys together, you get another $11.4 million in salary, and you add those 3 cap holds for those picks to the cap holds of the free agent. That's $26 million extra dollars on top of the Pacers team salary that you have to compute into the mix. And all of a sudden, when you add in all their guaranteed salaries, all their stretch salaries, all their draft picks, and all their cap holds, they only have $14.6 million in cap space on July 1st. Now, that's misleading. That is a misleading number, and I'll explain why in the second segment on how they can get more and all sorts of that stuff. But really, the cap holds are why that's misleading. They could cut all of their free agency cap holds on July 1st immediately and get more cap space. And if you ignore those and just say, here are the 12 players they have, and they're heading into free agency, their practical cap space is the term that a lot of people use. How much could they use if they actually wanted to spend as much as feasibly possible without making any stupid decision, right? They could stretch Miles Turner's contract and make more cap space. Sure, that's not practical cap space, right? Practical cap space is what cap people refer to as like the amount of space a team would have if they do reasonably smart things to get to the most space possible. And that is if the Pacers start free agency and slash all their cap holds right away, they would have about 29 million in cap space this summer. If I were talking about the Pacers or making plans for the Pacers in my head, thinking about what their free agency could look like, that's about the number I would start with. It's not a perfect science, and I'll get to why. There's ways they can get more space their salary floor is going to be a big consideration for them. Their draft picks could and maybe will end up changing. But if you have to put a number in your head for the Pacers cap space this summer, given all the details and numbers and names I just said, I think 29 million is about the cap space that makes sense for the Pacers. That said, there's a lot more to it. How can they get more space? What could they do with that? What does that look like for them? Let's get right to that in the second segment. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you guys about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. What is it? Well, you pick 2 to 6 players. Will they go over under on their PrizePicks projection? You can up to 25 times your money. For example, will LeBron James, who's now out of the NBA playoffs, have more or less than 7.5 rebounds in a game? They do it for assists, points, threes, whatever. Super easy concept, super fun. It's just you versus their projections. You can make your picks in like a minute. It's safe with fast withdrawals and operational all over North America. And right now, they're running a $1 million daily super flex promotion in the NBA playoffs. Every day, the playoffs and the finals, one PrizePicks unit will have a chance of becoming a millionaire. You place an entry after 8 a.m. Eastern. One will be randomly selected every day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex. And if you get all 6 right, you get $1 million. You can get all the payouts for 5 or 4 correct picks. And full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. Go to that link to opt in and be eligible for the $1 million entry. And once you opt in, just play the game like normal. You could be the lucky winner. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON to sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks Daily Fantasy, made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, if you're watching on the new YouTube screen, go check out Locked On Nuggets. They're off to the finals. Congrats to the Denver Nuggets, their first finals appearance, an ABA team. The Pacers are all too familiar with the ABA process. Nikola Jokic is amazing. That team was awesome. That was such a fun game. The Sombor shuffle, 3 off one leg. Ooh, he's so good. Locked On Nuggets, definitely the place to go for your second listen today. How can the Pacers get more cap space? And there's a couple other things I want to talk about cap space related before getting into the salary floor and why that also makes the Pacers offseason more complicated. So the first thing is the way the NBA calendar works. Technically, the Pacers are still under the 2022-23 league calendar. They will be until the end of June 30th. And guess what? The draft is on June 22nd. So technically, on draft night, the Pacers will have zero cap space. That's very counterintuitive to actually think about, but they used all their cap space this season. They renegotiated and extended Miles Turner. They brought in Jordan Noir's money. They brought in George Hill's money. They brought in Serge Ibaka's money, right? They signed James Johnson twice, technically, right? They added salary throughout the season, and they reached the salary cap. They have no salary cap space until free agency actually starts. Why does that matter? Well, that means on draft night specifically, they can't make these trades. They can't prep for they can prep for signings, obviously, but they can't, like, none of the trades they could do that would take in a player into their cap space can happen on draft night. They cannot happen until the new league year starts and the Pacers cap space actually exists. That's a small caveat to note. As I talk right this second, the Pacers have no cap space. As the draft rolls around, assuming the Pacers have not made trades by that date, the Pacers will have no cap space. But by July 1st, they will have the numbers that are being discussed here. How can they get more, right? Because what I just said is, well, if you add all this stuff up, the cap holds, the draft pick cap holds, the stretched money from last year's trades, they only have $15 million in space. That's not that much. That's not as exciting as a lot of people have billed this offseason. Well, that's because it's kind of a misleading number, right? And I talked about this with the cap holds part of this, but I'll get into a little more detail on what a cap hold is here. George Hill, for example, he just finished up a 2-year, $8 million deal. And if you're coming off a 2-year deal, this is oversimplified, but you have early bird rights, right? A team that had George Hill last season would have his early bird rights, meaning they could sign him to a deal that is 1.75 times higher than his previous year's salary. I don't want to do the math in my head, but that's an easy one. That's $7 million next year. That's if they're signing him and they're over the cap. The Pacers could sign him using all their cap space. They shouldn't. That'd be stupid. And if a team was over the cap by $1 billion, the most expensive NBA team ever, guess what? They could sign George Hill to a $7 million contract legally because it doesn't matter. They have his early bird rights. So that's what the cap hold does. It allows a team to have those bird rights. If you get rid of a cap hold, you lose those rights. You can still sign the player, but you can't sign them using those mechanisms. So that's what that's what cap holds are actually for, is to kind of provide a salary hold to not let a team just go ducking way under the salary cap, sign players, and then just re-sign all their guys right after. You can't do that. You can't have both mechanisms. So that's what a cap hold does. And so the Pacers are under the salary cap next season. We already went through the digits of that. So they don't need these cap holds. They don't need to have this advantage to re-sign George Hill or James Johnson or Brissett or anybody. And they might not bring back any of those guys. We went through the Brissett stuff already and the Johnson stuff and the George Hill stuff. But even if they want to bring back any of those guys, O'Shea Brissett might be like a $5 million player, but the two vets are minimum guys, right? Their cap hold, yeah, maybe in a specifically weird sign and trade scenario is valuable, but almost certainly a zero value cap hold to have, because the Pacers could just sign them to a minimum deal anyway, or using their cap space. They don't need the cap hold. So the second free agency starts, if the Pacers have a free agent lined up they want to sign for way more money than their cap space, they could immediately cut all of their cap holds for their free agents, right? That could be 12/01 on July 1st, the first thing they do. And they'd immediately free up $14.7 more million in cap space. That has nothing to do with their draft picks. That has nothing to do with the players on their team. That is the easiest way for them to instantly free up space. If they do that, that would get them practically close to something like 27, 28, 29 million in space, depending on a couple little factors that don't really matter. So that is what I think, if you want to actually discuss how much cap space the Pacers have, the number I would use in my head is 28-ish million, 29, low 29s, because that is practically what they have. If they go into negotiations with a player that they absolutely covet and want, they can say, we could sign you for up to $29 million a year, because if they love a player, they're not going to let George Hill's cap hold. I keep using his example because his cap hold's the highest, but any of these players, right? That's not going to get in their way. They're going to say, we'll cut these all, and that's it. So really, that is the practical number I would say. That is the salary cap minus the Pacers' guaranteed salaries, minus cap holds for the 3 first-round picks they have, minus the stretched money for the players they cut when they tried to sign DeAndre Ayton last summer. $29 million. That is how much space the Pacers can have. And that is the easiest way they can get more by their own accord. They don't have to make any trades to do that. They don't have to stretch somebody. They don't have to do anything weird. They can just get to that amount on their own with no funny business. Now, I think they'll actually have a different amount of cap space than that. But that is, if you were talking with your buddies or you were just curious about what the Pacers could do this summer, I would assume my head right this second that on July 1st, they'll have about $28 million of cap space. Now, that's before the draft. Obviously, they could trade their picks and either free up space or lose space, depending on what they do. They could trade for players or agree to trades for players, and that could influence what their salary situation looks like. They could do a number of things that will change that. But right this second, that is what I think fans should prep for, is about that number, right? Anything in that range makes sense. Now, how could they get even more if they needed to, right? Because maximum salaries can be way, way higher than that, right? If you're signing a guy to the lowest max, the 25% max, the first year of that is still a crazy high number. We're approaching like 34 million now for a 25% max salary this season, right? The 30% max is even higher. The 35% max is even higher. The 30% max is almost $40 million. The salary cap is flying up. I need people to get used to these numbers, because if the salary cap jumps up as high as it possibly can every season until the end of my sheet, which is 2027, 2028, the salary cap that year will be $200 million. Okay, it'll be $199 million, but still crazy how fast these numbers are spiking. So anyway, the lowest max is going to be about 32, 33 million, which the Pacers are below that in theory. So they're still not quite at max space, which is just a stupid phrase to use anyway. But if they wanted to get there, what could they do? Well, trades are the easiest way. You dump a player for less salary in return, you clear up space, right? They cleared a ton of space in the Malcolm Brogdon trade last year. Who would the candidates be? I don't know. It depends on what the trade is, right? What makes sense there. But the easiest money for them to probably try to pursue getting off would be like Daniel Tice would be someone maybe that they would like to do that for. No one else is like in salary dump territory in terms of what they are and what their money is. He's the most likely candidate to me. And They can also stretch people again, right? That is still an option that's possible. It's not something I would ever advise. I think stretching is the last ditch effort to try to do so. But Tice would once again be the leading candidate. Tice only has $9.1 million guaranteed, even though he has 2 years left on his deal because of that team option next year. Stretch that over 5 years, and all of a sudden you've cleared out like $7 million in space this year. That's super easy to do. Again, not advising that, but that is an easy way for the Pacers to get more space if they wanted to have max space, at least for the lowest max slot. If they needed to get to the highest max slot, they'd have to get really clever. They'd be trading away some guys or not having some of their picks on the team. And look, they're probably going to be a trade team, but that is the ways that they can clear more space on top of what I already said. The cap hold thing, super easy. In fact, I would almost guarantee that's the first thing you see on Real GM's transaction log on July 1st of free agency is Pacers renounce the cap holds of George Hill, Shea Brissett, James Johnson, Lance Stevenson, Kendall Brown, and Gabe York. I bet that's the first thing you see. Everything else will kind of stem from that. But still, there's more to this still. The salary floor complicates all of this and makes the Pacers offseason so fascinating to me beyond even what has been talked about in terms of their roster spot crunch. I want to close out talking about that and hopefully have you fully familiarized with the Pacers salary cap situation heading into the draft and next season, assuming they make no trades between now and then. We'll see. There's always one or two little ones that happen between then. Before we close out today's show, though, I want to talk to you guys about the Gametime app. Best way to buy tickets for the events you want to go to. It's fast, it's easy. You can get tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee at Gametime. Stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. They've got flash deals on last-minute tickets. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They have images of the seat views right on their app. And their lowest price guarantee. They've got event cancellation protection. They have job loss protection. Try it yourself. The images of the seats are clutch. You can buy your tickets in a matter of seconds. It only takes 2 taps. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, the Gametime app will credit you 110% of that difference. So that is a great way to ensure you're getting the best possible deal with those tickets right to your phone. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. If you're done checking out Locked On Nuggets after this, go to Locked On Lakers, the end of that season. LeBron making subtle hints about his future. I don't think he's retiring. But woo, that was interesting to hear. Locked On Lakers, Kamenetsky Twins will have more for you on the post-mortem of the Los Angeles Lakers, who, hey, they made the conference finals. That's way better than I thought they'd do. Credit to that team. So we've been talking about the cap. How much space will the Pacers have? How much money can they spend in free agency? And that is all fine and dandy. But they're very likely to trade some of these draft picks. And the salary floor makes this all even more confusing. What is the salary floor? Well, remember, last season I talked about this a few times. If you've been listening, if you've been an everydayer for a while, you got to hit this number by the end of the season. In the past, this is how it worked. If you don't hit this salary floor, which is 90% of the salary cap, that's your minimum team salary for a season. If you don't hit it, you have to pay that amount to your players. The Players Association will decide how much goes to which player on your team, but you're paying that amount in salary to your team no matter what. And most owners would like to pay the agreed upon price for their asset, which makes sense. They've negotiated this, or at least their GM has negotiated this. They don't want to be paying more for it. Now, it's not like the end of the world, but most teams like to go over it for various reasons. That's how it worked in the past. Now, the NBA has said, hey, if you don't meet the team minimum salary, I talked about this in the CBA changes episode. If you don't hit the team minimum salary by the first day of the season, you're not getting tax revenue sharing anymore. And that's probably a player's thing they negotiated in because they want to get paid. They want players to be paid as soon as possible. And the Pacers last season were under the floor on day one of the season, right? They renegotiated and extended Turner mid-season. Super rare, right? The other renegotiations and extensions like Harden and Robert Covington in the past were before the season started. So they also did trades to take in money during the season. And that stuff is still possible, but that means assuming every team ever is going to want to get revenue sharing payments, which they are, because why wouldn't they? That means teams are going to hit the floor before the season, right? They're just gonna. And so that means another thing is the Pacers have to spend up to the floor by opening night. And the floor if it's 90% of the salary cap, I keep throwing a lot of numbers at you here, but that's a big kind of chunk of change. That's $122.4 million. Just based on the salary the Pacers have and guaranteed money, they're really far away. You add in just the money from the Pacers draft picks and the stretched money, they're still like $16 million away from the floor, not the salary cap, the salary floor. So even if you think about the Pacers making trades this offseason, consolidation trades, whatever, they have to add $16 million in salary. And that's if they make all three of their first round picks. If they trade any of those away in the trade, then that number becomes even higher, right? So think about what the Pacers are facing right now. They have 3 first-round picks plus the 2 second-rounders, and they only have 3 roster spots. If you count the two-way slots, sure, they have more roster spots than that, but first-round picks can't get two ways. So they're already in a crunch once again. So how the heck are they going to hit the floor? How are they going to spend $16 million? Are they going to cut players on their team who have guaranteed money? I mean, no one on their team is a cut candidate. That doesn't make any sense. That'd be a waste of an asset. So the Pacers have to find a way to trade away enough players to take in at least 16, probably more because they're going to be trading away picks at some point, million extra dollars. That's a good player. Only 2 players on the Pacers make more than $16 million right now, right? So like trading away Chris Duarte for a $20 million player barely gets you there, right? Like that is what we're talking about here. For example, trading away Daniel Tice for a $25 million player barely gets you to the floor. Right? It's very complicated. So the cleanest way, or like the easiest to project way that this would happen is I am making up names. I'm not reporting anything. I'm going to be very clear. But let's say that, I don't know, I'll pick 2 random players. Isaiah Jackson and Aaron Nesmith get traded for 1 player, right? So now the Pacers have an extra roster spot and they send away $7 million for whatever that player is. Then they could sign someone with that new roster spot to a bunch of money and get closer to the floor. Signing a player is an easier way to add salary than trading just because it doesn't take 2 to tango. It doesn't take 2 teams. Now, maybe teams will be shedding salary, right? I think that's something the Pacers can probably bank on. The good timing here that teams dealing with these new first and second tax aprons might be shedding some money this summer, which could be helpful for them to poach them away for free and easy. But adding $16 million in salary is hard. It's hard, especially because once you add it, you can now not add it again. It's not like it's an infinite pool of money. So the opportunity cost exists of you only get 1 chance at that trade. And so all this to say, yes, the roster spot crunch for the Pacers is fascinating. They have more draft picks than roster spots. But even if they just make the picks, they're so far below the floor that they'll still have to have a busy summer. Let's say they use all 3 of their first rounders, and then that is how they backfill Hill, Brissett, and Johnson spots. And then their second round picks and Kendall Brown fill their 2-way slots. That's it. They've done it. They filled the roster, right? Sounds great. Except doing that would still leave them more than $10 million away from the salary floor. They would have to add that money and they wouldn't have any roster spots at all, right? So they have to add money in a trade at that point. You get what I'm saying about the complications. Yes, of course, the roster spots are the biggest part of this, but the fact that every player on the Pacers is either on a valuable contract or just a cheapo deal in general because the team was kind of resetting last year, right? It's crazy how inexpensive their team is considering that they have playoff goals next year. They're going to have a nuts summer. Trying to add that much money and talent while also juggling 5 picks, while also juggling roster spots is insane. That's why if you remember Kevin Pritchard's press conference at the end of the season, he said, we're doing so much modeling and there's so many ways this summer could go. And so if you think a player is overpaid in the NBA, they still might make sense for the Pacers. If they have a deal that runs way beyond this year, that doesn't make sense for any team. But if it's just a guy who's overpaid for 1 year, they might make sense for the Pacers just because they can afford to take that player in and use them more productively, right? That salary would make more sense on the Pacers than their teams. They can do so many things because they're well below the floor, and I'll have to figure out how the heck they're going to get there. How are they going to get there? Draft picks are not enough for them to get there. They're going to have to trade for a guy who makes a lot or sign somebody who's actually good enough that merits a lot of spending. There are ways they can do it. They could also, in theory, if they are totally stuck, they could renegotiate and extend Buddy Hield. I think he's the only guy who's going to be eligible for that this summer. There are like ways they can get there, but they're all kind of complicated. So it's going to be an absolutely banana summer for the Pacers. Their salary cap situation, their roster spot situation, their crunch in general really dictates a lot of movement and a lot of potentially really hard decisions. And their salary cap situation is crazy. But again, none of this becomes confusing until July 1st. And oh, by the way, on July 1st, when the new CBA starts, not only will the Pacers have all that cap room, they'll also have a $7.6 million room exception to add players. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. And we'll have it covered right here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. That was a lot of information. It was probably a little bit confusing, a lot of words, a lot of numbers, a lot of situations. But in short, Pacers, I would estimate on July 1st, right now, before any trades, have like 28, 29 million in cap space and are about 14 to 16 million below the salary floor. There are ways they can shuffle those numbers around a little bit, but they're going to have a lot of work to do to fill that space, to fill out their team, to comply with the rules, and to accomplish their goals. Of course, if you have questions, I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East, or comment down below on YouTube. I'll try to reply to as many of them as I can. I'm going to be recording a lot of shows in the next couple of days because I'll be gone for 5 days later this week and early into next week. So apologies if I'm a little slower on replies. I just have to get ahead on a lot of work because I will be out of town for a while. Should be really fun, though. I'm excited for the trip going to Alaska. But anyways, tomorrow, Eamon Thompson, as we continue looking at some of the draft picks, the overtime elites, better of the Thompson twins, or at least widely considered to be the better twin. Ben Pfeiffer will join us. He'll also be our Osar Thompson correspondent. It's easier to just do both with one person. That's all coming later this week, plus more free agency stuff. Thank you all a ton for listening. Hope you had a fantastic day. We'll see you tomorrow.